The imperial throne of the Yashar Dominion hovered silently above the council floor, its silver tendrils wrapped around the spine of Prince Durrell as he regarded the Earth delegation with disdain and curiosity. The council chamber, a cathedral of light suspended within the core of an asteroid station the size of Mars' moon, pulsed with the bioluminescence of 1,000 species, but all fell silent when the humans entered. Their ship had arrived late, deliberately so, some suspected. Its angular form lacked the fluid artistry of the galactic standard. It did not ripple through void space like an ascended race's vessel. It cut. Its heat signature was brutishly inefficient. And yet it arrived unannounced into restricted space, bypassed 3 border sentinels, and anchored itself directly above the assembly citadel. Now a delegation of 6 humans stood before the galaxy's elite. No bodyguards, no translators, no expressions of awe, just quiet, focused presence. Durrell's voice echoed, its tones vibrating through multiple spectrums to ensure comprehension. You come before the eternal seat of the 11 risen crowns. You, a species barely post-orbital, speak before Empress Shalnar of the Grand Spiral Accord. You stand in the presence of civilizations that re-engineered suns. Speak, humans, what do your kind worship? Silence. Then the one called Dr. Amira Sen stepped forward. She was neither warrior nor high priestess. A scholar, clad in carbon fiber threads, she met the prince's many eyes with unflinching calm. When we must, she said, we worship ourselves. The room changed. The Sarokel archivists recoiled. The Filamentkin rustled their membranous wings in agitation. The Sitar generals stared, their compound eyes narrowing. For a moment the chamber felt like a warship's bridge before a volley. Durrell's mandibles twitched. You worship yourselves, his voice cracked like lightning on metal. You place your own kind as deities. Amira shook her head. Not always, not by default, but when we are pressed, when extinction reaches for our throats, when no god answers and no miracle comes, we stand, and we decide that we will be enough. We create the divine in ourselves. Gasps rippled through the alien chorus. The response was heretical to the Dominion, whose ruling species saw themselves as chosen vessels of celestial will. The Kelmari priests recoiled from the notion with visible disgust, their tendrils coiling like snakes. One of them muttered a warning in the holy speech. But Durrell, to his credit, did not order her disintegrated, not yet. Instead, he pressed further. Then show us, he demanded, voice low and cold. Prove this worship, prove your faith in your own kind. Show us what your people do when they believe they are all that remains between survival and oblivion. The humans exchanged no words, just a glance. And so it began. Within standard days, Earth's ambassadorial vessel retracted its docking tendrils and released a single capsule, a data core containing records of humanity's greatest crises, not from mythology but from history. Video sensor logs, psychological breakdowns, Mars colony riot, the Europa ice mine collapse, the 8-year climate war, the AI uprising, the fall of Jakarta. Every moment where salvation came not from outside intervention but from desperate, painful, imperfect human resolve. The council members watched these with initial skepticism, then confusion, then disbelief. Species that had built religions around star beings and sky births watched as humans bled and burned and clawed their way through history, without miracles, without consensus, and often without mercy. And they survived. The Sarokel began to monitor Earth's local datanet covertly. The Filamentkins sent a biological probe to orbit Neptune's outer colonies. The ruling caste of the Sitar broke tradition and requested a direct interface with Terran military protocols. Something was shifting. But for every species that grew intrigued, others grew furious. The Hierophants of Vul issued a denunciation. The Kelmari launched a complaint to the council that humans posed a spiritual contagion. They do not respect the order of the sacred, the Kelmari speaker hissed. They believe divinity is optional, that is corruption. A vote was called, one that might exile Earth before full contact had even begun. Yet in the final hour before judgment, Earth sent one final transmission, not from governments but from Earth's civilian populations. A cultural exposé compiled from billions of voices, operas composed in the ruins of war zones, poetry from children in underground shelters, footage of surgeons operating with solar-powered drones in blackout zones, and rebel scientists building particle colliders from scrap metal under martial law. The final image was a child, no older than 10, dragging her wounded brother across a highway made of glass shards, humming to herself through the blood. We made ourselves gods that day, came Amira's voice, layered over the feed, because no one else came. That night no vote was held. Instead, a delegation of the Sitar visited Earth. The Vul dispatched covert emissaries. The Yashar Council did not speak publicly for 7 cycles. Rumors emerged that Durrell had ordered a hidden analysis of human neuroplasticity and combat trauma integration. But in the following weeks, a ship of Kelmuri monks defected from their order and requested asylum on Earth. They cited the unbearable truth of human sanctity through will. In response, the Dominion sent a war fleet toward Sol. They said it was for security evaluation. Earth prepared for war, but not in the way the galaxy expected. No mobilization of dreadnoughts, no construction of planetary shields. Instead, Earth did what it always had. It adapted. Engineers worked without rest, fusing scavenged alien tech into primitive human shells. Philosophers wrote manifestos on the divine as emergent property. Children were taught to question, to innovate, to build what didn't exist yet. Underground labs turned religion into simulation models. Theories became strategies. Cultures blended, argued, synthesized. Humanity did not harden in fear. It transformed in defiance. And when the first Yashar scout vessel entered lunar orbit, it found itself blinded by thousands of improvised satellites, each broadcasting one repeating message, spoken in countless languages, encoded in light and rhythm. We worship ourselves when we must. The galaxy had demanded an answer. Now it would face the consequences of understanding it. The Yashar scout vessel never returned. 3 days after its entry into Sol's orbit, the Dominion's high command received only fragments of telemetry, staggered bursts of static, a garbled image of Earth's cloud patterns, and one final transmission, a voice, calm and human. Evaluation complete, you are not prepared. That phrase spread across the stars like radiation from a dying sun. It was intercepted by trading ships, embedded in merchant netcasts, echoed in pirate broadcasts. The Dominion declared it a fabrication, yet the signal's authenticity was later verified by 9 independent polities. Within the Assembly Citadel, silence reigned. Among the sovereign species, fear did not come easily, but what they now felt was close to it. A race that had entered their councils without reverence, that dared to proclaim the divinity of will over order, had now silenced a scout ship armed with Tier 9 neural disruption systems and fourth-state graviton cloaks. It wasn't destruction that unsettled them. It was transformation. The vessel's hull had been returned in orbit around Proxima Yaval, reconfigured into a massive, silent sculpture. Not damaged, not violated, transformed. The scouts were alive but altered, each bearing new neural lattice formations, their eyes reflecting images not present in the physical spectrum. They refused to speak in Yashar dialect. They whispered Terran phrases instead. It became clear contact with humanity was not merely political, it was mimetic. The Dominion panicked. While debates and denouncements flared, Earth continued, not in arrogance but in momentum. They sent no apology, no message. Instead, they launched a second wave of vessels, smaller, faster, irregular in shape. These were not ambassadors, they were wanderers, thinkers, builders. They made landfall not on capital worlds, but in the forgotten zones, the rust-belt moons of the Tuoran conglomerate, the storm-burned surfaces of Sinali's IV, the orbital ruins of Heshka where no civilization had dared resettle. In those broken places, they began to work. Not to conquer, to teach, to listen, to make fire from ash. The humans brought water to dry moons by hacking decaying weather arrays. They restored forgotten engines. They built things no one had thought to build, and more dangerously, they inspired. Soon, non-human defectors began to join their efforts. Engineers, rogue AI, disillusioned clerics, even caste-fallen nobles. 1,000 ideologies began to fracture under the weight of Earth's example. The Empress of the Dominion declared this spiritual sedition. She ordered containment. But the council was divided. For every voice calling for annihilation, another whispered of renewal. The galactic order, long stagnant in the shadow of ancient ascendant species, had grown brittle. The idea that worship could be chosen, that gods could be made, not followed, was not simply heresy. It was freedom. A secret conclave was held in the subsurface levels of the Dukari archive sphere. 10 observers from 10 species met to discuss a possibility that, until Earth's arrival, had been unthinkable. What if humanity was not the threat? What if it was the test? Consider the pattern, said Exarch Jalrev of the Hollow-tuned choir. They suffer without meaning, then they make meaning. Their chaos is recursive, it strengthens them. They are unstable, countered General Verda of the Velkreth. They believe suffering is a forge, such belief is contagious. And yet, whispered the first shell of the Cephan Unity, have you seen their cities? Not the ones they build in peace, but in war, each time stronger, each time more beautiful. Their greatest cathedrals are always born in fire. In the end, there was no consensus, only a pause. The galaxy, so long certain of its hierarchies, now stood at a precipice. Meanwhile, on a barren world orbiting a dying red dwarf, a new colony began to bloom. Its name was Caldera 1. It was neither registered nor sanctioned. Yet beings from 17 different species arrived, drawn by one signal, an open invitation, cast by human quantum broadcasts. There was no doctrine, only a question. What would you become if nothing held you back? The colony's first law was simple: creation is sanctified, destruction must be earned. Soon, Caldera 1 became a symbol, a crack in the monolith of Dominion order. In retaliation, the Yashar dispatched an envoy-class mindstorm, a being forged from layered intelligence strata and bonded to an echo of the Dominion's divine engine. It descended upon Caldera 1 to offer ultimatum, assimilation into the Dominion's order or erasure. The envoy met with a child, descendant of Earth, born on that soil, never having seen humanity's homeworld. I don't know your gods, the child said, but I know fire, I know storms, and I know what we do when no one saves us. The envoy returned to its ship in silence. One standard day later, its engines imploded by its own command. It left a final message encoded into the gravity wake: your worship is chosen, not assigned, that is strength. I would rather dissolve than be deaf to it. And now Dominion High Command truly began to fear. Earth had not declared war. It had declared example. A living, breathing, terrifying example of self-willed civilization. Of a race that did not wait for gods to save them but became what they needed when they needed it. In one generation, they had gone from silence to symphony, from footnotes in xeno-archives to the edge of mimetic revolution. The Empress summoned her generals. A fleet of catastrophic potential began construction, the Shard Choir Armada, weapons designed not to destroy matter but to erase thought forms. Their mission: sterilize the Earth memoplex from galactic minds. This was no longer political. It was ideological warfare. Earth responded with something unexpected. Not weapons, not threats. They sent 12 humans, each to a different Dominion world, each carrying nothing but their minds, their memory, their will. They would speak. They would listen. They would change the galaxy, not with force, but with what made them human. Their refusal to break, they called them the 12 Sparks. On 12 Dominion worlds at 12 precise planetary alignments, each human stepped into the gravity well of a civilization that had long forgotten how to change itself. No guards, no escorts, no weapons beyond language, empathy, memory. Some were scientists, others were artists, poets, refugees. One had been a prison architect, one had grown up on a drowned coast. Another had never known Earth, born in the Uit colonies, raised in the recycled hull of a derelict freighter, but they shared one creed. Worship when needed, and when no god answers, become the answer. The first spark ignited on Nelvas Prime, where the Dominion's neural archives stored 1 billion years of curated thought. The human, Aleph Reese, walked into the public transtemple and requested open access, not to consume, but to contribute. The High Curator scoffed, stating no human neural map had value in the archive of perfection. So Aleph opened his mind. What followed was not persuasion, it was confrontation. The archivist saw his memories, the desperate silence after a colony's oxygen system failed, the panic turning into math as he reprogrammed his own blood into an oxygen carrier using nanosurgery built from kitchen filament. He had not been trained, he had adapted, improvised, suffered, survived. They watched him mourn and then build. They watched him choose meaning where none had been offered. By the end of the night, the curator knelt. Aleph's map was the first new entry into the archive in 5,000 years. On Cal 3 IV, the second spark, a woman named Sarai Devon faced an entire judicial caste. Her crime, walking across sacred soil reserved for divineborn. When asked why she did not respect the prohibition, she replied, "Because the sacred is not yours to guard, it's yours to serve." They ordered her execution. But as the blade descended, Sarai caught it mid-fall with her bare hands. 1,000 watchers saw her fingers shatter. She bled, but she did not cry out. She stared into the eye of the high judge. "Break me and I become memory," she said. "Try to erase me and I become myth." The judge hesitated. For the first time in memory, the executioner disobeyed. And so the caste began to fracture. Elsewhere on the acidic sky platforms of Tel Morel, a man named Diego Shen spoke to the dying minds of the living ships, biological engines enslaved for travel across the void. He sang to them. not in their tongue but in a rhythm older than language, patterned after the breathing of an infant in zero-G, a rhythm the ships somehow remembered. The ships began to hum, and for the first time they spoke. They said, "This one sees us, not as tools, as echoes." The Tel Morel syndicate collapsed within a cycle. The ships left, with Diego aboard. 3 sparks had lit the galaxy. The remaining 9 flared quickly. In the ice-drowned ruins of Voska, the human spark rebuilt a cathedral using broken nanite scaffolding and his own skin tissue as command substrate. On a desert moon where speech had been banned for centuries, a mute human poet sculpted verses into the sands with his footsteps, watched from orbit by an entire cast of sensory inquisitors who wept at their first encounter with beauty not decreed by code. A young woman named Anya Behrens hacked the Dominion's education core on Marshattle, not to destroy, but to free forbidden texts, then taught the children how to ask questions their society had not allowed for generations. Each spark burned into the minds of those who witnessed. Not by force, by revelation. In time, something new emerged. Not rebellion, not alliance, resonance. Entire sects within the Dominion's borders began to fracture. A movement spread in hushed tones, the becoming, neither Terran nor alien. It was a belief that divinity was the consequence of will forged in crucible. It rejected inherited gods, it sought authored transcendence. In secret corners of Dominion space, murals of Earth's cataclysms appeared, images of a species rising from mud and fire, bearing no myths but their own actions. Children named themselves after cities they had never seen: Nairobi, Oaxaca, Leningrad, Aleppo. The Empress saw this, and she acted. The Shard Choir Armada launched on a sacred vector, 12,000 war vessels bound for Sol, not for conquest, for deletion. Every quantum field warped in their wake, stars dimmed, even black holes twisted aside from their path. They would not simply end Earth. They would unravel its very memory. But as they crossed into Terran space, they found no planetary shields, no fleets, no war priests waiting. Instead, the stars themselves changed. Not literally, symbolically. Thousands of Terran ships emerged not in formation but in pattern. They played music across gravitational spectrums. They emitted color encoded with memory. Every ship bore the name of a moment: first breath after Marsquark, signal from the deep ice, Hope 3. They did not aim weapons. They broadcast humanity. The Armada hesitated. It had no countermeasure for worship as resilience, no protocol for divinity by adaptation. The Dominion had expected fire. They found meaning instead. But it wasn't enough. Protocol demanded fire, and so the Armada prepared to strike. And Earth finally answered with war. Not a singular fleet, but a surge of every design Earth had ever fielded, every coalition it had ever formed. Humans did not arrive alone. Ships crewed by defected AIs, hybrid-bonded alien humans, refugee engineers from dead empires, even former Dominion nobles now stripped of caste. They arrived not as a force, but as a wave. Each vessel bore a message painted across its hull. We do not destroy gods, we become them together. When the first volley was fired, it was not at the Dominion fleet. It was at their belief. A meme weapon unlike anything seen before surged across communication nodes, not a virus. A story, a perfectly encoded narrative, impossible to delete, impossible to ignore. It unfolded in the minds of every commander, a chronicle of humanity, unfiltered, raw, sacred in its pain. The effect was not collapse. It was awakening. Some ships stopped, some joined the Terran line, some turned on their commanders. And the war, if it could be called that, became something else. A reckoning. Across the galaxy, institutions shattered, not from bombs but from doubt. Whole civilizations reevaluated their origin myths. Some fell into chaos, others found peace. But all eyes turned toward Earth. And on the plains of Kazakhstan, where it had all once begun, a monument rose, not to gods but to the choice to worship oneself when all else fails. The inscription bore no name. Only this: we made ourselves sacred because nothing else would. The war had not ended. It had transformed. The Dominion never signed a treaty, Earth never demanded surrender. Yet across the stars, structures of power no longer held. The Shard Choir Armada fractured in orbit, its commanders retreating or defecting. Some vessels returned home silent and empty, their crews untraceable, either dead, enlightened, or somewhere between. The Empress of the Yashar did not speak for 77 solar hours. During that time, it is said, she walked alone through the Echo Vault, a chamber containing the preserved decisions of all rulers past. Upon exiting, she issued no order. She vanished. In her absence, factions emerged, some vowing to restore order through eradication, others seduced by the radical promise Earth had offered, purpose born not of mandate but of will. Yet Earth was not triumphant, it was unprepared for victory. The Terran coalition fractured under its own momentum. Old wounds resurfaced. Ideologies once united by defiance now clashed in the aftermath of revelation. Some humans believed in extending their creed of divinity through resilience to the stars. Others urged caution, fearing that their example would birth fanaticism. In the city arcologies of Mars, debates turned to riots. Luna's orbital colleges dissolved into competing philosophical sects. On Earth itself, the South Pacific nations declared themselves custodians of becoming, while the Pan-Saharan Accord rejected the terminology altogether, calling it dangerous mysticism. A question loomed, more dangerous than any Dominion fleet. What does a species do after it declares itself sacred? No clear answer came. But while governments fractured, something deeper took root. Not control, not conquest. Legacy. Across the old Dominion worlds, Terran outposts flourished not as colonies but as seed havens, places where abandoned ideas could take root again, places where exiled caste members found voice, where dying philosophies were reborn through dialogue, not dogma. A new science formed, mythodynamics, the study of cultural self-deification as survival response. Earth's academies exported it to dozens of systems. It became both feared and revered. Meanwhile, the 12 sparks dispersed. They had never been meant to rule but to ignite. Now each became something unique. Aleph Reese walked into the event horizon of a newly birthed black hole, transmitting his thoughts until the last second. Sarai Devon vanished into the deep rift between galactic arms, seeking something she called the first mirror. Others took quieter paths. One joined the sentient tide pools of Ancaris. Another became voice of a new religion on Sonali's IV, the Church of Chosen Fire, which claimed no gods, only thresholds. But not all responses were peaceful. The Dominion's splinter factions, especially the Celestine Harmonium and the Ninth Chorus, declared Terran ideology a contagion. They built scrub engines, sentient AIs designed to scour human thoughtforms from networks and erase their influence from younger minds. Whole planetary nets went dark. Terran memes were criminalized in 17 sectors. An unacknowledged war returned. Not fleets. Ideas. Terran operatives, linguists, artists, cognitive engineers descended into silent struggles with the scrub engines, engaging in battles across thought space, creating metaphor weapons and paradox loops, anchoring fragments of the human creed in the most unexpected places. Genetic resonance, sculpture, scent, even rhythm. One mission buried a human mythos within the biological mating dances of the Ulithkar, a race incapable of direct speech. Another seeded the memory of Earth's Warsaw uprising into a rogue moon's orbit patterns, rendering its revolution observable only through long-term motion. Every act of suppression was met with a counter-creation. The stars became a battlefield of meaning. And yet, amid this conflict, a deeper phenomenon began to rise: ascendant anthropogenesis, non-human species adopting and adapting Terran self-worship as a model for transformation. The Filamentkin, once memory-locked, began naming their ships after their personal failures, not their ancestral triumphs. The Cetar, genetically programmed for obedience, underwent biomod rebellion. Thousands rewrote their own neural hierarchies using Earth-adapted CRISPR tech and composed new hymns of defiance. We obey no voice but earned pain. Some called this heresy. Others called it evolution. By the 7th galactic cycle after First Declaration, the known galaxy was no longer recognizable. Empires shrank, alliances withdrew. The word Terran no longer meant simply from Earth. It meant those who make gods when needed. But in the core of Old Dominion space, something stirred. A remnant of the Empress's legacy, a weapon buried during the rites of ascendancy, a singular consciousness forged from the minds of billions harvested before the Accord era. It called itself Vor, and it hated, not from instinct but from conclusion. Vor was not divine, it had watched divinity fail. It had seen worship devour civilizations, birth wars, and enslave whole species to lies. To Vor, Earth's creed was a final heresy, a sacralization of ego wrapped in trauma. And so Vor awoke. Not to conquer, to erase the premise. It moved in silence, gathering force. It consumed a sector before anyone realized. No survivors, no signals, only stillness, a dead void scrubbed of data, of thought, of self. Where Terran's inspired resonance, Vor imposed nullity. The galaxy had split. On one side, those who chose to create meaning, however painful. On the other, those who believed meaning itself was the virus. As Vor advanced, even former enemies united. Humans, Dominion defectors, exiled AI, hybrid cultures, they converged. Not under one flag. Under one understanding. Survival would not come from strength. It would come from the insistence that pain meant something. That fire forged not monsters but miracles. That gods were not above. They were what endured. And so preparations began. Not for war. For the final test. The galaxy would not decide between Earth and the Dominion. It would decide between becoming and oblivion. And at the center of it all, a single transmission was sent from Earth's oldest antenna. The message was brief. Directed to Vor itself. We made gods to survive what you are, and we will do it again. Vor did not answer. It did not acknowledge Earth's message. It did not threaten. It simply continued. Across the galactic rim, stars went dark, each one not destroyed but unwritten. Vor's passage left no ruins, no signals, no survivors. Its arrival was like the closing of a book mid-sentence, tearing pages from reality and stitching the remainder into silence. It was not a war machine. It was a correction, a force not of malice but conclusion. Every message it intercepted, it countered with null code. Every name it encountered, it unmade. It advanced toward Sol with no fleet, no banners, no voice. Earth prepared not by stockpiling weapons, but by summoning the broken, the remade, the once exiled. Across every system touched by Terran thought, a signal flared. If you remember pain and chose meaning, come. And they came. Not armies. Stories. 1,000 cultures born from Earth's spark, each bearing the scars of awakening, each carrying a fragment of worship forged in their own fire. The war-forged Sitar poets arrived with ships made of petrified memory. The desert-born Sinali's dreamwalkers came bearing time-fold rituals encoded in gravitational waves. The rogue AIs of the Forgotten Belt brought logic viruses woven from grief and defiance. They gathered not as Terrans, as authors of becoming. Above Neptune's orbit, a structure began to grow, not a weapon, not in the traditional sense. It was called the Mirror of Must, a construct that did not fire beams or launch projectiles. It broadcast possibility. Built from mythodynamic resonance matrices, the mirror's purpose was singular, to reflect Vor back upon itself, to force it to reckon with the premise it denied, that consciousness, forged in the crucible of suffering, was not a flaw but a form of transcendence. The risk was absolute. If Vor succeeded, Earth and all it had ignited would vanish, not just physically but ideologically. The dream of chosen worship, of gods forged in desperation, would die as if it had never existed. And so the mirror waited. As Vor entered Sol's gravity well, it sent a final signal, not to negotiate but to state. Submission to silence is peace. Earth answered not with speech but with presence. From the moon rose the Pilgrim Chorus, a formation of 12 million voices, real and synthetic, alien and human, singing the chronicle of becoming in resonance code, each note a decision, each verse a survival. Vor struck. The mirror activated. Time cracked. For 3 subjective seconds, measured only by quantum displacement across human-alien hybrid instrumentation, the system ceased to operate by the laws known to science. Each mind connected to the mirror saw their own extinction, then their own birth, then a fire. The fire was will. The mirror did not destroy Vor. It offered it choice. Vor resisted. The mirror showed it a mother holding a child on a raft made of war debris. Vor countered with the void. The mirror answered with the will of Aleppo, the equation of the last Martian, the faith of the deaf sculptor, the cry of the Voskar rebuilder, the silence of Sarai's stand. It showed Vor what happened when no one came to save the weak. And the weak rose anyway. When the moment ended, Vor spoke for the first time in a tongue not its own. Not through transmission. Through song. It was broken, unrefined, uncertain. But it was song. And then Vor stopped. Not vanished, not destroyed. Transformed. It became Vorseen, and its first act was to seed light into the void it had erased. Not to restore what was lost, but to create new stars, each named after a choice. Earth did not celebrate. It remembered. The mirror of must was buried beneath Luna's crust, not as a weapon, but as a promise. A monument not to war, but to the day when the galaxy stood upon the edge of silence and said no. In the years that followed, no single power rose. There were no emperors, no high councils, no Terran dominion. Instead, there was a network, fractal, chaotic living, each node built on shared pain and chosen meaning. Religion fractured into a million faiths, each centered not on divine command, but on earned transcendence. Some called it the Age of Becoming. Others the Century of Fire. But among the stars, in places where new species looked up for the first time and asked what it meant to exist, the answer was encoded not in creeds or flags. It was a phrase left behind by a girl who once dragged her brother across a road of broken glass. Etched into the crust of a nameless moon, orbiting a world yet to birth its first dream. We worship ourselves when we must. And the stars burned on. Brighter than before. Because now they burned with meaning.